The concept of space travel has long been used to inspire creative minds about the possibility of the endless expanse, and yet the only viable attempt from official history to try to reach other stars was the Orion project, or using a pusher plate to detonate nuclear weapons to propel the craft to a reasonable velocity to reach these nearby stars in a reasonable amount of time. But this project was shelved, ostensibly to allow rockets to reach the moon. We're informed by the mainstream that black holes do really exist, although the closest black hole to Earth is 1,600 light years away, or 1,540, plus or minus 40 light years. Not that it matters, because we can't even reach a star that's 4 light years away. We're looking at the mainstream account, though, to understand what black holes really are, because it seems as though science spends a lot of time trying to answer exactly what black holes are, even though they can't be seen. We can only see the gravitational distortions, or the visual distortions. But could there be an entirely different dimension to black holes? Could it be possible that these Dark Star Enigmas actually exist a lot closer, perhaps even within the very land that we inhabit? And could they have another dimension to them? Let's look at what science says about the official black hole. Now, it should be noted that black holes are a known trope in science fiction. Indeed, they're viewed often as gateways, or the ability to actually transcend the vast distance of space. I always recall that line from the film Contact, based on the book by Carl Sagan, that if there was nothing out there in all this space, it would be a vast waste of space. And yet there's so much space between even the nearest stars, it does appear to be a waste of space. But we do have these dramatic images, and we do have this concept of the black hole, which science does devote a lot of effort to explaining. Now granted, as we stated, the nearest black hole being 1,600 light years away, and we have no possibility of physically reaching it anytime soon, if you accept the mainstream accounts, and if you accept the mainstream element of the reality of space, then you realize that a lot of this is just theory. And indeed, there's lots of different theories concerning the existence of black holes, concerning explaining exactly how they operate and what they're really about. I was always interested, though, that we seem to know so much in theory about the existence of black holes and how they function. We're informed that they are simply the span of where all gravity is brought together in a singularity, and suddenly the rules of infinity apply. Ah yes, infinity, where you can often see it. You also look at other explanations from science about some of the misunderstood natures of space, the galaxy, and the universe, and we have things such as dark matter and dark energy that are used to explain many different things. The black hole being one of those very alluring concepts that could possibly offer an explanation for the great forces of destruction that exist out there in the cosmos, as Carl Sagan would say. But what's the reality behind it? Why do they devote so much effort to trying to understand that which is just theoretical, and that which we cannot even see? Because understanding it apparently allows us to understand the true forces of creation behind our cosmos. But perhaps, once again, with the mainstream explanation, we do have elements of truth that are interwoven into what is described as scientific theory. And indeed, when we look at some of these official images of what's supposed to be the distorted visual of a black hole that's how many thousands of light years away, then we have the concept of existence that could perhaps explain things that have transpired in the past, with the concept of black holes or the Dark Star Enigmas being much closer. Too close for comfort. But we're assured that in the mainstream there is no black hole that's actually near our planet in the existence of our cosmos, and that it doesn't pose a threat to us. Yet again, we devote so much time to understanding the theories because it's essential to understanding how the cosmos developed. And one of the recurring themes that you tend to see is the fact that if light cannot even escape the power of the black hole, and therefore it cannot be seen, it's worthy of study. And the terms that are used, such as dark energy and dark matter, are not science fantasy. They are actual legitimate terms. They just sound like science fantasy or space magic to explain that which is not understood. Because as scientists will admit, they don't understand these phenomena. They are merely trying to theorize about it. And perhaps, if there is such a thing that does exist as black holes, and they are a lot closer than we're led to believe, then suddenly the intense effort to study and understand them makes a lot more sense. Of course, perhaps it's just merely a failure to understand what the reality of existence is, and we're simply trying to make leaps to truly understand it. Whatever the situation, you can find plenty of examples of black holes that are used in science fiction, and indeed, they're one of the tropes of understanding the vast travel in space, since the black hole could function as a wormhole. There was even the concept that there could be a black hole at the very center of our great sun, our nearest star, which is not really that far away, as the light only takes 8 minutes from our star to reach our planet, again according to the mainstream scientific account. And there's other phenomenon that you can observe, whether it's radiation or radio waves and other means that can be used to detect these incredible black holes. The other theories that go beyond understanding their magnificent appearance and their tremendous mass, which is something that's always discussed. And then the concept of the black hole being a wormhole, or the possibility of spanning the vast distance in space, which, as Contact told us, because it's filled with stars, it's not a waste of space. There just happens to be a lot of space between these stars. That's very challenging to traverse. There's no shortage of wondrous and dramatic images for what the black hole can really be. We even have the anatomy of the black hole fully understood, going off of such things as the event horizon and the accretion disk and all the other wondrous terms for the anatomy of that which we cannot see and that which we cannot even get close to. But what if these dramatic possibilities with the black hole actually do exist? What if they reflect something that is a lot closer? Something that in fact is to be found within our lands to this day. And perhaps we even have some examples of the black hole or the Dark Star Enigma of the past. And this is where we examine what accounts that we have in our myth and in our legends, because it seems as though there are numerous descriptions of things that we might think of as dimensional rifts or evidence of what would be described as eclipses that lasted a very long time. What if they weren't actually seeing eclipses? What if they were seeing what we are told and informed are black holes, but much closer? Imagine one of these things appearing in the sky above us. Well, of course, science will tell us that it would instantly destroy the entire planet and the system because it's too close because of the vast gravitational effect. But yet there's other theories in science fiction that indicate that black holes could be used as a tremendous source of energy that created an artificial singularity, could have the potential to provide infinite amounts of power, in addition to its possible gateway application. This is very interesting because when we step back and we look at what science posits, and then how science fiction goes the extra length to explain some of the difficulties in traversing the cosmos and the reality, suddenly we do have some elements from this that provide a different explanation. Think about the fact that if it were possible to create a singularity, or what we think of as the black hole, and if someone had the technology to do it in the past, in a civilization that was far more advanced than we were ever led to believe, then suddenly the reality of black holes or the Dark Star Enigma becomes much more present. But there's also, as always, a dark side to it, because there have been certain explorations of black holes in certain films, such as the eponymous Disney movie, The Black Hole from 1979, that posited that the black hole, in addition to being a force of vast gravitational distortion, was also a gateway to a literal dark dimension. A hell, if you will, which is exactly how the film ends, by showing the crew journeying through hell before they escape. And then, of course, the antagonist of the film being trapped in hell, trapped in his robot servant's body for all eternity. There was another more recent film called Event Horizon that posited much the same thing. Again, created an artificial singularity where the crew traveled through it, and in reaching this other location, they had to go through a dimension of utter chaos, or what we may think of as hell. We look at many of the examples that we have in our past, our myth and our legends, and we do have accounts of certain individuals having the capability to open these dimensional rifts. Now again, actually interpreting and understanding what people were really writing about, many will say it just simply seems like yet another leap or another foray in logical inconsistencies. Yet if you step far enough back and if you look at the actual tangible examples that we have in our physical realm to this day, you will see that there do seem to be examples of technology that was far more advanced than our explanations of our official history would account for. And oddly enough, it does appear to be more modern technology. In fact, it reflects more modern technology that we're informed may have the possibility to create these singularities, these black holes, or these dark star enigmas. Indeed, how advanced was our individual and modular technology in the past? There seem to be many different conflicting accounts, and yet we have no shortage of examples where we are constantly surprised about what our ancestors achieved in the past. Of course, we'll be derided for even questioning this, and yet you look at some of the great structures that you can still explore to this day across the land, and you find things that are puzzling anomalies. Why would it ever be necessary to construct an entryway such as this on this particular structure? And why would anyone actually refer to it as a portal? Unless it actually was some sort of gateway. Perhaps it provided some sort of access to a completely different series of lands. You can even look at a positive application from this, where people could possibly travel to lands that are considered what we would think of as utopia, heaven, or places that offer a total positive experience. It doesn't always have to be a negative experience. And what if there is some truth to this? What if this is actually reflected in what we have in accounts from the past? But then we also have to look at the other side of it. It seems as though actually interfacing with this form of technology, this Dark Star Enigma, could also offer a gateway or a portal to a dark dimension, if you will. Now, is it actually the concept of transplanting your current land to this dark dimension, or is it allowing the elements of this dark dimension access to your land? There's no shortage of accounts, and there's certainly no shortage of explorations into the concept of cosmic horror. And whether you're talking about an author and you just think that it's an imagination, there seem to be many elements of art and creativity from our own official past that reflect the terrifying potentials of this cosmic horror. By allowing this dimension of chaos access to our land, we also enabled beings and creatures, and perhaps even those that have capabilities that far surpass our understanding, that which may be viewed as the old ones, with their tremendous capacity and the fact that they even view humanity with total indifference, because to them humanity is simply a lower life form that doesn't even match on their level of intelligence. And yet when you look around at some of the past accounts, we do seem to have examples of this happening, where in the past there were some sort of foray into opening these dimensional gates, these dark star enigmas, and it allowed some sort of evil to actually surpass the land and overcome the forces at that time and the civilizations that were around. And it's repeated in many different stories and many different accounts. Many legends of how civilizations and great forces in the past were overcome. And there's certainly the fact that we have this concept of entropy, the nothingness that may be the worst horror of all when we try to employ this dark star enigma or opening up this dimensional gate. We do have the numerous examples that we talk about, but when we consider the concept of entropy or total darkness overcoming the land, this is probably the greatest fear of all. Because when you can actually interface with something, when you have a physical reality, that seems to be something that we can hold tangible. But trying to imagine the true horror of the void tends to be the greatest fear that exists in the back of our mind. And so we have to ask the question, were there forces, were there civilizations, did our ancestors actually have the capacity to try to explore these other realms? And perhaps, much as science tells us that the official black hole could offer the technological solution, to spanning the vast distances in the cosmos, at least as they explain it to us. What if our past civilizations, our ancestors, saw this similar technology and employed it in a very similar way? Perhaps they truly understood the scientific applications along with their own internal spiritual energy and actually were corrupted in the very fact of trying to explore this. There's often the statement that they destroyed the sky, that they tore a hole in the sky in trying to achieve this, that this was merely the product of their vanity, that their civilization had existed so far and achieved so much that they had run out of places to explore, and this was the only means that they had to try to reach new lands, new areas to explore. But in the prospect of meddling with this technology, they actually opened up gateways, allowing dark beings and terrifying creatures, and even the very concept of the void itself to access the land. When you look at the old drawings and the old artistic impressions of what may have happened in the past, you could simply say that yes, this is just some fantastical depiction of the interior of the planet. But what if it represents something else? What if it actually represents a gateway, a portal, or something that allowed access for those in the past to lands that completely defied physical limitations? And that's where things really start to become a little crazy, because we think of accessing lands where the same physical limitations do not apply. Imagine if some of the basic rules that we think apply in this particular land may not apply in these other lands that they could access. What exactly would that experience be like? What sort of things would you really view? Would you really find these civilizations and these structures that suddenly seem impossible? There's the even more complicated possibility that in meddling with these forces and actually trying to open these dimensional gates, really exploring the very basis of the Dark Star Enigma, that the past civilizations actually enabled the overlapping of multiple timelines, or what we would think of as parallel realities. That suddenly, when there was a true defined boundary between these parallel realities, that meddling with this technology began to break down those boundaries. And suddenly you start to see timelines that overlap. You start to see corruption of these timelines to where different events that didn't happen in one timeline suddenly did happen in a different timeline. This would provide a completely different explanation for why we have some of the vast inconsistencies in what we see in the past. Unless, of course, you simply want to hand-wave the problem of logistics, which no one ever addresses when they talk about building the great structures in the past, especially in the 1800s, in the official history as we understand it. And yet, people want to accept the fact that, well, the explanation is everyone was a master craftsperson, everyone was a stonemason, everyone could build the wondrous domes and the great structures of materials that we can't replicate today. And it's not that we can't replicate those materials today, it's simply because we choose not to. But what if the real explanation for all this is the fact that there is a breakdown of boundaries? That perhaps somewhere across the land, or in places that we don't fully understand, there are examples of this technology that still function. Examples of this technology that was actually able to open the Dark Star Enigma. And because it still functions, we still have the overlapping realities, and we still have the inconsistent timeline. Now, you might think of these structures as palaces, as state capitals, as churches, certainly no shortage of churches or basilicas, and yet that's where we see those terminologies used with the great portals and the other examples of odd terms that are used for these structures that were ostensibly built for religious purposes, and yet they seem to serve so many other purposes at the same time. Perhaps this is where we have the total explanation for these vast portals and these gateways. The reason that the structures were built so large, and yes, it's still a viable theory that it could have been for a much larger physical being, but it's also a viable theory that they could have simply been built so large so they could allow vast amounts of people and material to travel through them, because there really was an effort to explore these other lands. And perhaps this is what explains some of these great figures that we have and many of these monuments that don't seem to make a lot of sense and don't even come close to reflecting the historical period that they're supposed to actually reflect. Indeed, we see a lot of inconsistencies with what we understand history to really be. Now, of course, you could simply try to explain this away as being artistic license, and that the artists who actually crafted these great monuments and these great sculptures, if you can think of them that way, were simply trying to reflect a more romantic concept of things such as the Napoleonic Wars or any of the other numerous conflicts that we have in our history. Yet we can't shake the feeling that there was a time of exploration, that in the past that someone had meddled with this technology, and it seems to have been a reality that they had broken down the boundaries between different realities or different dimensions, however you want to think of it as. There's so many different examples to where it could be applicable. And yet some of the other artwork and some of the other creative ideas that we have do give us the idea that the worst fate that could befall the land is if the boundaries between the realities, the parallel realities, or even the timelines are broken down. It suddenly leads to chaos, and not just simply chaos in this other dimension, but chaos that's managed to cross all the lands, all the realities, and all the timelines. And oddly enough, there are more examples of this in the official history. There are actual diagrams and there are actual accounts and what we think of as legend or myth or even origin stories that can only be explained by suggesting that this is possible. That the real answer to the enigma of the Dark Star is that it really was a gateway. Now, it wasn't always a gateway to potential dimensions of chaos, but it did seem to offer access to other lands of incredible bounty, and perhaps even amazing civilizations that did achieve a balance between the individual and the society, that didn't constantly seem to derive from competition and the concept of feeling that one individual is better than another. And yet that seems to be what persists in the land to this day. But who knows what the real origin is? This is just theories. But there are far too many examples of this concept with these gateways, these eclipses that lasted for a very long time. There are also elements that say that there are observations that occurred of multiple bodies in the sky. And what if these observations are actually based on something that's still in reality to this day? Now, people say that they can easily discredit these observations, and perhaps that's so. But it's a little difficult with the fact that the mystery continues to endure. And it's also very odd that when one tries to explore or discuss the areas in the land where it seems to be that there's more inconsistency, or there may actually be a mystery, that there's oftentimes resistance or technical difficulties. Whatever the explanation may be, though, we have to really consider the possibility that the civilizations in the past did explore the other lands, and they did have the capability to open these dimensional portals. And it's very likely then that the technology that was used to achieve this is still with us to this day. We might not have any idea of how it functions or what manner it operates in which it draws energy. And yet it seems clear that many of these are still functioning to this day. And that this would be the way that you could explain the fact that there's so many inconsistencies that are observed with the current timeline. Now, of course, you can simply hand wave it away as a psychological aberration. You could try to explain it as merely being a very large psychological operation, which is always the term used to discredit things. Or you could simply say that it's a product of someone whose mind is a little unstable, because that's always the way to explain away anything when you don't want people to ask questions or to explore certain concepts. And if that's true, then what's the issue if people are simply doing an intellectual exploration? You are not allowed to think something. You are not allowed to consider something. Yes, it is very odd, and it's a strange contradiction that we have and we exist in every day. And yet, I believe that the Dark Star Enigma is the true answer to many of the possibilities of the things that we do observe. Now, could there finally be the real question of, are we experiencing an actual reality, or are we experiencing something else? A simulation that has been broken down and is starting to malfunction? Or could it even be a dream, some sort of collective dream that we don't fully understand? There's so many different possibilities, but yet we examine and observe these inconsistencies every day. And they just didn't start in the recent present or even within the last 10 to 20 years. These examples of terror and wonder have been with us since the very origin of our civilization, and whatever the true origin of it may be, because it becomes very difficult to actually verify what really happened in the past. Keep in mind that from our official chronology, there is not a single person that we can talk to who can give us a first-hand account of what events transpired as recently as 1899. And it's even problematic to get first-hand accounts from 1900 to 1920, or at least the time frame of the years that we think of those years. But what really may have happened and how recently might it have happened? Is that explanation to be found in the fact that we do have overlapping and intersecting timelines, that we have realities where the boundaries have been broken down, and there are some realities that are intruding on other realities, or there's some timelines that have polluted other timelines, if you will, to where you have inconsistent events, to where you have things that have occurred that don't make sense, and certainly don't match what we would think of as the traditional explanation of cause and effect. I'm always amazed by how people always default to the same explanations, and they seem to be satisfied with that. And perhaps that's just simply the element of existence to where you have comfort. You know what the explanations are, and there's no reason to explore. You don't have to think that perhaps one of those very impressive Capitol buildings at one point in time was some sort of generator or some sort of technology that functioned to open these dimensional gates, these dark stars that allowed the previous civilizations access to other lands. And it also exposed them to some of the worst terrors and horrors, and ultimately led to their downfall. And who knows how many times this has happened in the past. And if we're talking about other realities and other timelines, suddenly this becomes infinitesimally more complicated than we really believe. And perhaps that's really where the scientific explanation of the infinite singularity at what we think of as the official black hole comes from, or what it's an attempt to explain. But what do you think? What's the real answer to the Dark Star Enigma? Is it true that black holes are thousands of light years away? Or is there some possibility that these dimensional portals still exist much more closer than comfort? Let me know in the comments. Thank you for joining me. Please like, comment, and subscribe.